And this, in my opinion, is one of the more famous or iconic passages regarding Jacob. Jacob's ladder. He has this dream, and in this dream he sees this ladder stretching up to heaven. Let's start here in Genesis 28 with verse 1. It says, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, to take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee and make thee fruitful and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee. Thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham. And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padan Aram, unto Laban the son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. So if you recall earlier in the Genesis account, Jacob, he had to leave his family at this time because of his deception. Right? He tricked his father tricked or deceived his father into blessing him instead of blessing Esau. And not only did that upset his father extremely, but even, Esau more. Esau had plans that he was going to kill his brother. And so his mother, I think, wisely suggested, leave the family for a while, go stay with your uncle until things calm down, until, Esau's not so angry. So he had to flee. So he's decided to leave his family for a time. And here in chapter 28, we see Isaac also instructing him to leave. And as he's telling him to go stay with Laban, his uncle, he gives him these instructions, not to marry a Canaanite woman. If you have your Bible open, mark it here in Genesis. We'll come back to Genesis and turn over to 1 Kings 11. 1 Kings chapter 11. So again, this passage we just read, Isaac instructs his son, telling him, don't marry a Canaanite woman. And people who are critical of the Bible, who want to persuade people not to believe in the Bible, they will isolate passages like this and say, look, Isaac was a racist. He's a xenophobe. The God of the Bible, they'll say, is racist, xenophobic. And so you should not believe in the Bible. And in fact, if you do believe in the Bible, you're a bad person. You're a racist. You're a xenophobe. Any other kind of slur they can use against you, they will use that. And that is a tactic that people will use to try and persuade people not to believe in the Bible or follow what the Bible teaches. Again, the idea here is, Isaac is saying, hey, to his son, don't marry this group of people. And they'll say that's racist and all these other things. Well, keep that in mind, and let's read from 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings 11, starting with verse 1. This is regarding King Solomon. Chapter 11, verse 1, But King Solomon loved many strange women. Strange here means foreign. Together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you. So that's a reference to marriage. So this is actually a command that they were given several times in the Old Testament, not to marry foreign women. Even God himself gave them that command. And notice the reason, verse 2, he says, For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as David his father. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. These are all names of false gods, of idols. And Solomon, the king of Israel, is building these false idols. Verse 8, it says, "Likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned away from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded." So this passage explains this prohibition that you find every so often in the Old Testament regarding marriage. The prohibitions in the Old Testament about a man not marrying a foreign woman had nothing to do with race, had nothing to do with the fact that she was just foreign inherently or a stranger inherently. And by the way, we can know that for a few different reasons. Moses married an Ethiopian woman. She was a foreigner or a stranger. We could think about Boaz and Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite. She was a foreigner or stranger to Boaz, yet they married. And by the way, their marriage is mentioned in Jesus' family tree. So, and again, the Bible portrays it as a good marriage. So, again, this has nothing to do with race. It had nothing to do with a woman being a foreigner, just that alone. And the idea at this time was, if an Israelite married a woman from a different nation, in most cases, that woman would be a pagan. She would not share the faith of the Israelite, believe in the one true God, Jehovah God. She, like the daughters of Pharaoh and so on, would worship these false gods, worship these idols. And that kind of mixture of beliefs or worldviews in a marriage usually does not work out. It's usually not a healthy combination. So that is what these prohibitions are about in the Old Testament. So when we go back and whether we look here at the words of Isaac or similar words in the Old Testament, has nothing to do with racism, has nothing to do with xenophobia. It's all about faith and the mixing of a man and a woman's faith if they have different faith. And there's a general lesson here. If a Christian man or woman is seeking a spouse, I think it is very wise for that person to be thinking about what kind of faith that potential spouse has. Does that faith match your faith? Will that spouse help you get to heaven? Will that spouse help you get to church in a more practical, day-to-day type thing or week-to-week type thing? Will that spouse help you get to church? If that marriage produces children, what is that spouse going to think if you want to teach your children the Bible? Will that spouse be in favor of that or against that? I think those are some very basic questions for any person to think about who wants to get married. And my advice, this is just my advice, and I say advice because the New Testament doesn't have a clear prohibition like this. I think there's some general principles in the New Testament regarding this, but in the Old Testament it's very clear. So this is just my advice, take it or leave it. I think it's wise to look for a spouse whose faith matches your faith. Again, just my advice, take it or leave it. So when we look at, again, Isaac's instructions, his son's about to leave home, and on this occasion, his last recorded words are, if I just put in my own words, find a faithful woman. Right? Make sure you go to Laban and go to that family because they're believers in God. That's the idea. So again, Jacob was leaving, and that was Isaac's final advice to him. Think about who you're going to marry, find a faithful wife. So he begins traveling to his uncle Laban. Going back to Genesis 28, let's go to verse 10, chapter 28, verse 10. It says, Jacob went out from Beersheba and went down to Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and lay down that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. And the land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, How dreadful is this place? Or how awesome is this place, we might say. It says, This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stones that he put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was called Luz at first. So again, this very, I think, famous passage where Jacob has this dream. And I believe, my memory's off, I think this is one of 7 times, I might be wrong, you have to double check me on that, but one of 7 times God appears to Jacob. And this, again, is a very important one. So as he traveled to Haran to stay with his uncle, he has this prophetic dream. He dreamed of a ladder, and the base of this ladder was on the earth, and the top reached up to heaven. Some other translations say stairway instead of ladder. And commentaries suggest that because of the time and the culture in which this was written, Jacob likely saw something like a ziggurat in his dream. A ziggurat was a building shaped like a pyramid, and it had a central stairway. And the stairway, again, this pyramid structure, would go all the way up to the very top of that building. That's what a lot of commentaries suggest this was a vision of. What he saw in his dream may have been similar to the Tower of Babel, described in Genesis chapter 11. If you recall, in chapter 11, the people's goal was to build a tower that reached up to heaven. So there might be some kind of connection to that and what he's seeing in this dream. Whatever the case might be, this ladder, this stairway, it reached up to heaven, and the text says he saw God at the top, and God stood there and spoke with Jacob in this dream. And you can see here that God repeats all the promises that he made to Abraham. And so the idea is now all the promises made to Abraham are going to continue on in Jacob, and they're going to continue to be fulfilled in Jacob. So this is the most significant part of the dream in the context of the Old Testament, that Jacob is now the promised seed through whom God would fulfill his promises. Now, with this in mind, there is a significant lesson from the New Testament. If you've been coming to Sunday morning Bible class, this is something we've covered as we've been studying the Gospel account of John. On one occasion, Jesus talked with Nathanael, and he said to him, John 1, verse 51, he saith unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, hereafter ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So this is a clear reference back to Jacob's ladder that we just read here in the Old Testament. And notice here, Jesus does not describe the angels going up and down on a ladder or a staircase. He says to Nathanael, you'll see them ascending and descending on the Son of Man, right? A reference to Christ. So the idea is Jesus is the ladder. Jesus is the stairway that connects earth to heaven, that he is our mediator. And that is a very significant lesson. So this is an antitype and a type, or a shadow and a reality. A shadow in the Old Testament, the reality fulfilled in Christ. You know, Christ is our way to God, right? He famously said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So Jesus is our mediator, and that's, again, an important lesson that we can learn from this Old Testament story. So Jacob woke from this dream. He understood this was a special place. He calls it the gate of God? Is that what he said? In my memory, verse 17, this is none other, the house of God, the house of God. And that's what Bethel means. It means house of God. So he named it that. So a very special location where he encountered this revelation from God. So he continues his trip to his uncle. So again, he's in the middle of a journey to go all the way to live with his uncle, and he ends up living with his uncle for quite a few years. Chapter 29, it says, Then Jacob went on his journey. Chapter 29, verse 1. Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he finds a well there, and he begins to speak with the people at the well as he's taking care of his animals. And he asks them if they know Laban, and they say yes. And he encounters Rachel, whom he's immediately taken with. And he finds out that Rachel is one of the daughters of Laban. And eventually he finds his uncle. Right? He finds his uncle Laban. Again, in chapter 29, let's go to verse 13. Chapter 29, verse 13. And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him a space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Tender-eyed is just a polite way of saying she was not attractive, at least to Jacob. Right? You know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. He was not attracted to her. He was attracted to Rachel, who he had met earlier. So it says again, she was beautiful, well-favored. He liked her. Verse 18, Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee than I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had for her. That's a nice love story, if you ask me. You know, here's a man who's willing to work for this woman he wants to marry, and he works for 7 years. But it says, you know, it seems like it was just a few days for him, because again, he was so taken with her and loved her so much. So they had this agreement, and marriages were arranged back then. I'm assuming the women had some say. You know, when we think back about the story of the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, even though it was prearranged, you know, Rebekah did have some say in it. So they were arranged, and that was the agreement, that he would work, and after the 7 years are over, that Laban would give his daughter in marriage, his daughter Rachel in marriage to Jacob. And so we read about his marriage in the next part of this chapter. Now, one of the lessons of the Bible, and this is taught rather frequently in Old Testament and New Testament, is you reap what you sow. Sometimes it happens in this world, sometimes it doesn't, but the Bible does definitely teach in the end of all things, we reap what we sow. And I mention that because if we think back in what we've read before, Jacob deceived his family. He, working with his mother, he deceived his father, he deceived his brother, he beguiled them, and it was a very serious deception, so much so that he had to leave his family because his brother wanted to kill him. So again, he's ran to stay with his uncle. Well, Laban was not the best uncle. I don't know if you have any crazy uncles. I think I'm probably the crazy uncle to some of the people in my family. I don't know. But Laban was not the best uncle. He deceived Jacob and took advantage of Jacob in a few different ways. So again, they had this agreement that he would work and eventually he would marry Rachel. Chapter 29, if you go to verse 21, Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. So he worked those 7 years. The time for that agreement to come to its completion was there. He's like, all right, it's marriage time. And verses 25 and following, verse 25, it came to pass that in the morning, and again Laban gave him his daughter, and they went into the tent and they consummated their marriage. Verse 25, it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did I not serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled or deceived me? So he wakes up in the morning, and it's not the woman he was promised. It was the sister, the other sister. And so he goes to Laban and says, you've tricked me. What is this? You've tricked me. You've deceived me. And verse 26, Laban said, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. So he worked another 7 years for his uncle, and then, he married both of these sisters. One commentary says this about Laban, what he did. And I quote, Laban, however, conceived a scheme by which he could keep the service of Jacob for another 7 years. He substituted Leah for Rachel. And as you read the story, you might think, well, how could that happen? What did a man understand that, going in there and, it's the honeymoon time, What did he obviously know that's not the right woman? Well, according to this commentary and other resources I've read, it says this, because of the thick veils worn by the bride and the poor light in the tent, Jacob did not discover the deception until morning. Laban's plot could not have been carried out without the willing cooperation of Leah, end quote. So there was a scheme here to deceive Jacob, and ultimately it worked, right? And again, he was probably very eager after those 7 years to be with his newlywed wife. So he probably wasn't thinking right. So there's definitely some poetic justice here. If you recall, Jacob, again, with his mother's instructions, Jacob disguised himself to deceive his father, right? You remember that? He put on the goat hair so he'd be hairy like his brother, and his brother's clothes so he'd smell like his brother because his dad's eyesight was failing. And so he disguised himself to go trick his dad. And here, Leah, in a certain sense, was disguised to trick Jacob. And again, that deception worked. Laban and Leah deceived Jacob. So it's a reversal of what Jacob did. What Jacob did to others, that was done to him. So there is that idea of you reap what you sow. So they were married, and I'll mention, and I've mentioned this a few times in these sermons, they had some marriage practices that we don't have today, that we would, who knows, there's some crazy things going on in our world today. I think most normal people would think are weird. It'd be kind of weird for a man to be married to 2 sisters, right? But that was normal back then. That was not considered strange in their time, in their culture. And I will briefly talk on that in just a moment. We won't read it for time's sake, but if anyone happens to take notes, if you jot down chapter 29, verses 31 through 35, and then also chapter 30, verses 1 through 24, that describes the circumstances of Jacob's children and how each of them were born and their names. Joseph is the last son named in this passage. He was the 11th son. And then later in Genesis 35, Jacob fathered Benjamin. And Benjamin was his 12th son. So he had 12 sons. He also had some daughters, but he had 12 sons. And these 12 sons would produce the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, keeping your Bible marked in Genesis, go to the book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 1. And this is an easy reference to keep in mind if you want to read all the names of Jacob's sons. And again, their names would be the names of the 12 tribes. Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. So this is the brief account of how this family of 12 in Egypt really started to grow. And again, those families became tribes, and those tribes eventually became something like what we'd call states in our country. And this is again how the nation of Israel formed. They formed in Egypt, and because, again, Pharaoh was worried they might take over, that's what led to their enslavement in Egypt and the whole Exodus story. So again, just a quick lesson, and we'll move on in our text. Today there's many strange ideas about marriage and sexual ethics, and I don't know if anything surprises me anymore. People today will, I don't even want to say, go to a doctor, mutilate themselves, and say a man can get pregnant. There's some weird stuff going on in our world today. So nothing really surprises me anymore. And every once in a while in the news, it's not very common, but every once in a while I hear things about people trying to, at least in the United States, trying to normalize polygamy. And there's some religious people who will try to use the Bible and use the Old Testament to justify this idea. Polygamy is having multiple wives, or a marriage where there's more than just a man and a woman. And in the Old Testament, God never commanded polygamy. In fact, if we go back to Eden like Jesus did, when Jesus taught about marriage, we can see God's plan for marriage as one man and one woman. And in fact, we just read a moment ago from 1 Kings 11, where the multiple wives of Solomon, and I'd say also from the story, we didn't look at all the details, but the story of Jacob and others where these patriarchs had multiple wives, I don't see these as glowing endorsements. Often these marriages led to problems because, naturally that would happen when you have two people competing for one person's affection. With all that said, the New Testament is much more clear about this, that, again, marriage is designed for one man and one woman, again, specifically a male and a female. It is never, ever in all of recorded Scripture for two people of the same sex, or, again, more than two people, and so on and so forth. It is for a man and a wife, a single man and a single woman. Here, as Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, he says, "Now concerning things whereof ye wrote of me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." And this is a euphemism for intimacy. He's not saying it's wrong, to actually just touch a woman. It's about physical intimacy. That's what he's talking about. So he says in verse 2, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man, singular, have his own wife, singular, and let every woman, singular, have her own husband, singular." And this is consistently the kind of language you find in the New Testament regarding marriage. It is for a man and a woman, and every man ought to have his own wife, and every woman ought to have her own husband. And there's no such thing as like open marriage or polygamous marriage or same-sex marriage and all the weirdness we see today. This has nothing to do with God's will. The Bible's word for all those things I just said is fornication, right? God's plan for marriage is a man and a woman, and for them to be united for life. So, again, we see in this Old Testament story that, God perhaps overlooked these things in the Old Testament period, but there's times where we can see it did create problems. Regardless of all that, Jacob was married to these two women, and he had children, and again, these children would become the nation of Israel. Lastly, let's consider Jacob's wealth. Again, he's living with Laban. He's been working for his uncle for 14 years now. So this is how long he's been away from his family. He's now started his own family. And he is now getting the urge to leave his uncle, right? He wants to go off and, be his own family. And with that in mind, let's read from this last chapter. Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. Genesis 30, verse 25. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go unto my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Jacob brought his uncle a lot of success. So his uncle wanted him to stick around. Verse 28, and said, Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. And he said unto them, Thou knowest I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me, for it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now, when shall I provide for my own house also? And he said, What shall I give thee? And Jacob said, Thou shalt not give me anything, if thou wilt do this thing for me. I will again feed and keep thy flock. I'll pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come. And when it shall come over for my hire before thy face, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. And Laban said, Behold, I would it might be according to thy word. And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he said, 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So in very ancient times, they did not have currency like we have, right? Their currency, we're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago. Their currency mainly was livestock. And there's a lesson from our history that's worth considering. And when I first learned this, it kind of blew my mind. And this is information I think everyone in our country should know. In the United States, our money used to be based on what was called the gold standard. And again, I want to talk about money for just a second because this whole conversation is about money, basically. What are you going to pay me? What are my wages? And they come to this agreement. In the United States, our money used to be based on what was called the gold standard, and that means every dollar represented a certain amount of gold by weight. And you could literally go to the bank or a treasury and give them X amount of paper money, and in exchange, they would give you a certain amount of gold in weight. So all our money was a representation of something that actually existed, of gold. And gold has always been valuable because of its scarcity. It is precious or limited, and you can't make more of it. People can fake gold, but fake gold can be detected rather easily for someone who knows what they're doing. So you can't go and make a bunch of gold or just manufacture it. Since it's always scarce, it has inherent value. And so the only way you can get it is by working for it and people exchanging it and trading for it and so on. So in our country, the value of money could fluctuate, but a dollar always had intrinsic value because it represented actual gold. It could be exchanged for gold at any time. And one of the most important things regarding this is the gold standard also prevented the government from creating an excess of printed money. And the way this worked was, again, all of our money, all our economy was tied to gold, including tax money. And so if people in the country did not like the way the economy was going or the way inflation was or so on and so forth, the citizens could go redeem their money for gold from the nation's treasury, and then our government wouldn't have any money to spend. And so they'd be in a fix, and either they had to fix their finances and get things back on budget, or the government would shut down for I don't know how long. So, in short, we the people had a significant say regarding how the government spent money. Because again, if enough citizens withdrew gold, because all our money was based on gold, that would get politicians to fall in line and do what they needed to do. Well, to make a long story short, we don't have that anymore. We don't have the gold standard. And this is a very complicated thing. I'm not an economist. I'm just a preacher. So take what I say with a grain of salt and do your own reading and study. But in 1971, which I was surprised it was that short a time ago, in 1971, the gold standard was ended once and for all. There was a few things that kind of showed it was going to end before that, but in 1971 is when it finally ended. And our currency system moved to something called a fiat currency. And fiat is a Latin word which means decree. And the idea is, you ready for this? Our government decrees that the dollar has value, therefore it has value. That's it. It's just paper. It's just ones and zeros going through the computer to your bank. There's nothing physical behind it anymore. So the dollar is no longer redeemable at a bank or treasury for a physical commodity like gold, say gold or silver. And again, the problem with this, one of the main problems with this, is the government can print or put as much money in the economy as it wants at any time, and that brings down the value of a dollar. It's inflation. And I think we felt the effects of that rather recently, because in 2020, because of COVID, our government decided they're just going to hand out a bunch of free money. Well, isn't that great? Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we're paying for that decision. I feel still today, I don't think groceries and other things have come down all the way since 2020. So again, it's a decision we're literally paying for today. This information is from a website called officialdata.org. It has many statistics about inflation through the years. And there's one section on this website that is titled $100 in 1635 and its worth today compared to inflation. And if you can read the print there, and I believe this is accurate. So again, do your own reading, do your own study. But it tracks the value of $100 each year starting in 1635 up to this present day, and it adjusts based on inflation. And that first paragraph there says $100 in 1635 is equivalent in purchasing power to, I'll just round up, to about $4,000 today. That's how much the value of the dollar has decreased in a relatively short period of time. And if you notice, there's a small graph, and I'll just share this with you, and I'll move on. If you notice, again, this traces the value of $100 adjusted for inflation, going all the way back to 1635 up to recent times. And you can notice for most of the time it was pretty stable. There was some fluctuation, pretty stable. And again, if you remember, I said the gold standard ended in 1971. Well, notice where the graph changes. The government was just free to spend as much money as it wanted, and that's exactly what it's done since then. And inflation is the hidden tax that we all pay. $100 today has much, much less value than it did 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and so on. So what's the lesson from all this? I don't know exactly. I think it's worth knowing. This kind of blew my mind when I learned this. But I would say, vote for leaders who will make good decisions with our tax dollars. Leaders who are in favor of careless spending and printing more and more money. They are leaders who are in favor of high inflation. I forget what our debt is. It's like trillions and trillions of dollars. It's number we can't even wrap our mind around. It's so big. And the bottom line is, politicians who are in favor of just spending endlessly, and it's been amazing some of the news stories that have come to light recently, how we're giving money to foreign countries regarding the most silly and sometimes wicked things. That kind of politician again, the bottom line is they're saying your grocery prices are going to be higher, your gas prices are going to be higher, your money for utilities is going to be higher. This is what all this careless spending leads to. It's the devaluing of the dollar. And as these staples go up, often wages do not go up to match them. So this is a story about money. And again, in Jacob's time, he didn't have all the crazy economy that we have. Again, livestock was the most common currency for people in his time. You know, wealthy man in Jacob's time, he was a man who had a lot of animals. And so this had its own unique problems between Jacob and Laban. You know, he's been working for his uncle now for 14 years. How can he tell what animals are there because of his hard work versus what animals were there and alive and thriving because of Laban? And Laban, his resources, his work, and so on. So they strike up this deal where Jacob basically says any animals that have spots or speckles that are dark color, I'll take those. And all the other ones, they'll stay with Laban. He quickly agreed to that. Did I not put this quote up there? Yeah, I did. There we go. One commentary says he suggested that the speckled, spotted, or dark-colored sheep and goats be culled from Laban's livestock and given to him. Sheep in that region were usually white and goats were usually solid dark color. Realizing this, Laban quickly agreed to the terms of his son-in-law, thinking that Jacob had made a terrible mistake. So again, this shows you Laban he had a mindset of where he was taking advantage of his nephew. Because again, according to this resource, most of his sheep would have been white. Only a few of them would have been speckled and so on. Well, we're not going to read it for time's sake, but the rest of that chapter describes, Jacob was a good shepherd. He was a good farmer. He paid attention to his animals. He noticed which ones were strong. He started to selectively breed them. And eventually the speckled and spotted and striped animals greatly outnumbered that of just the white ones. And so the wealth of Jacob surpassed the wealth of Laban. And in chapter 31, that starts to create some bad blood between Jacob and Laban. And so he eventually has to leave his uncle because that success of his created a wedge between them. So there's, again, a lot of interesting information we can learn from these Old Testament stories. And again, when we think about Jacob and we think about the history of the Old Testament, this is inspired history. This is something that God has preserved in His Word for us to learn, and there's a lot of practical lessons. And there's spiritual lessons as well. Again, when Jacob saw that dream, in that dream he saw that ladder, again, the New Testament teaches us that was a foreshadowing of Christ and who Christ would be for us. And it was through Jacob and through his family and through the nation of Israel, it would be through him that the Messiah would come into the world. And these things are foreshadowed and described in the Old Testament if we're willing to read it and to study it. So we can thank Jacob that Christ came into the world and God fulfilled His plans through this man. And again, it's through Christ we have hope. It's through Christ we have a way to heaven, a way to God the Father.